Hey guys, I got a ring light, so now I'm a real YouTuber. The lighting is way better, so that's good. Anyhow, I'm just gonna get right into this because I'm pretty disturbed by a lot of the hypocrisy that I'm seeing, and I really think that it's pretty unfair for someone to be pointing fingers at anyone who rides with a bit and calling them abusers, and just being so vocal about that and making young, impressionable people feel really bad and feel like they need to switch what they're doing when they could very well be riding humanely, and probably are riding under the instruction of very, very experienced people who know what they're doing and are teaching them how to do things properly. So I really feel like this whole guilt trip thing is just getting out of hand, and I was pretty disturbed watching Raleigh's newest video where she calls someone a bitch and goes off and swearing at them because their horse rears, and she blames it on the bit just because the horse rears. I went through her videos and I could find a few videos of Link rearing and he was bitless. With that in mind, how is it fair for someone to go around blaming any misbehavior on the fact that a horse is wearing a bit, but when their horse misbehaves in the same manner, it's totally fine and it's not abusive just because they're wearing a hackamore instead of a bit? It's really unfair, and there's always a variety of causes that could make a horse decide to rear, bolt, or buck. Like, there's so many things that could go on. So anyways, I'm gonna paraphrase something she said regarding the clips of the other horse in her video rearing, and she said, "The reason why horses rear or freak out or whatever is because they're trying to escape pain." And I found that to be really interesting and quite hypocritical based on the fact that her horse rears and freaks out in some of the clips she's posted, and I don't know what would have caused those reactions. I was not there. It's not really fair for me to judge. However, if she's going around judging other people for the same thing, but I'm sure she wouldn't want that same judgment on herself, I don't really think that's fair. So I'm going to show you the clips just to point out the hypocrisy and point out the fact that horses can react in ways that look like they're from discomfort or pain, even when they're bitless. So now, after seeing that, would it be fair for me to suggest that the hackamore is inherently causing pain from these videos, like Raleigh did to the ladies with the rearing horse in the most recent video, just because he was wearing a bit? Why is this type of hypocrisy acceptable? I personally don't know what may have caused this, but it's pretty clear that the horse is uncomfortable and irritated in these clips. They don't seem to present themselves like liveliness or play from fear, excitement, or other types of arousal that may cause that behavior. Blaming these clips solely on the hackamore would not be fair, so logically someone who's experienced with these types of rearing and misbehavior issues shouldn't be so critical of others and blaming their equipment right off the bat. If she were watching this happen with any other rider who chooses to ride with a bit, I'm sure she would likely blame it on the bit if it wasn't herself in those clips and she was watching the exact same thing happen with someone else who chooses to ride in a bit. I truly don't believe that her horse is abused or anything whatsoever. I totally think that she loves him and cares for him very well. He looks healthy and well cared for, but these clips and photos that I'm going to show you show signs of irritation and show her own shortcomings as a rider, which we all have, but not all of us are as critical and pointing fingers as frequently as she does, and just generalizing a lot of things and making people feel guilty for riding the way they do, even though there's really no basis for her to go off of that. Next, I'm going to show you some photos in which she is riding her horse around in a hollow frame, and I'm going to talk about why that's not a good thing and why this is quite possibly way more concerning than people riding in bits if they do so humanely. Obviously, bits can be misused, so can bitless, so can any piece of equipment, and it's not good for people to abuse the equipment, but we also need to keep in mind how sensitive other areas of the body are and how vulnerable they are to injury if we do not get the horse working properly. As you can see in these photos, Link is very hollow and not carrying himself properly. Whether that's due to the choice of bit or bitless, I don't know, but it isn't very fair for someone who has shortcomings in their own riding and equine welfare to be so critical of others and so adamantly against what other people are doing and base their channel off of just critiquing other people without really knowing the background or anything and making blanket statements. Something that a lot of people seem to forget is how sensitive the spine of the horse is. Horses were not engineered to carry people. This is why it's so important for us to teach proper carriage of the hind end, back, and neck. This allows horses to carry people in a manner that won't be as hard on their back or causes damage in the manner that going around in a hollow frame can. The spine is extremely vital to the health of the horse, and it is an exceptionally nerve-rich area. For whatever reason, so many people seem to forget about this when they're debating equine welfare, and especially when they're debating what equipment is okay to ride in. Regardless of whether or not you choose to ride bitted or bitless, it is very important to teach proper carriage, and this is something that will cross over into the importance of equine welfare no matter what you choose to ride in. Riding around hollow like this long term is not good for the health of the horse, and it's far more likely to cause damage than someone who rides in a bit appropriately and ethically. That can be done really safely. I think bits can be absolutely used in an ethical manner. Obviously they can be misused too, but for anyone who gets their vet out to see their horse frequently, they're going to do oral exams and they're going to look at your horse's mouth, and if there is any damage, it would be found then. And personally, in my 18 years of being in the horse industry, I haven't had any oral problems with my horses from being ridden in bits. Now, I just wanted to draw those comparisons because I was pretty disturbed by the fact that she's so critical of others and that she's name calling in the recent video and using a lot of put downs, and I've also had a lot of people come forward and say that they felt personally attacked by her videos and asked if they're mistreating their horses or abusing their horses and just feeling really crappy about themselves, and I don't think that's fair. I don't have any problems with her as a person. I'm sure she's a nice person, but with the amount of followers that she has and the audience that she's showing her videos to, I do think it's really important for her not to state her opinions like they're factual, and to be clear that this is just an opinion, and then present her studies and not present them like they're conclusive, because they're not. And I also don't think it's fair to take videos of people's riding and name call and just be kind of crappy about it. Like, you can critique riding and you can critique people's care of their horses without name calling and swearing at them. I just don't think it's very nice, and I was thinking that she was turning over a new leaf and not going to do that anymore, but the most recent video was just very disappointing and I wanted to say something. So now I'm just going to go further into the spine and other aspects of proper carriage or improper carriage so that you guys will hopefully learn something from this, because I do think it is something super important and it's an aspect of welfare that most people don't really seem to mention. But obviously my horses aren't perfect. They don't go around properly 24/7. They're still building the muscles to do that and they're still learning, but I do work very hard with my trainer and on my own and with my mom's help to teach them how to carry themselves properly. And I also do a lot of other things to promote the health of their backs, like chiropractic and massage work, and getting saddles properly fit to them to make sure that they're pain-free and happy to work. So I think all of that is very important, but like I said, my horses aren't perfect. They're not going around perfectly. They need to still do more work to get there. They're still quite green and they're still learning, so they'll pop in and out of contact and they're not going around in a proper frame the whole ride. They'll have slip-ups, but they are learning and they're building up their backs very well, and I've been working with a vet and my chiropractor and massage and a saddle fitter to make sure that they're happy and comfortable, and I would definitely recommend that you all do that as well. Spine is supported by soft tissues including tendon, ligaments, and muscles that act on the horse and help support them. The most significant changes in the back during an engaged frame versus a neutral frame are seen right underneath the saddle area where the rider would be seated. This is why it's so important to teach proper engagement, because the change is so drastic there when they're engaged. Because horses are flight animals, their natural response to weight on the back at first is generally to hollow their back and lift their head up in response to the weight. This is why it's so important to teach them to respond differently to that when we're riding them. When the head comes up and the back hollows, the spine drops and the vertebrae come together. This takes away all flexibility from the horse and causes the spine to compress. Improper engagement doesn't allow the spine to properly absorb shock and can result in chronic soundness issues over time. Obviously, when carrying a rider, shock absorption is very important, and this is also why it's so important to be a balanced rider, and this is why it's so important to keep that in mind when you're looking at studies of bitted riding that are done on horses that would frequently be carrying unbalanced riders, such as the one done on therapy horses, those riders would be way more likely to balance on the bit and be thumping on the back, thereby getting pain responses from that. And on top of this, horses that are part of lessons, rings, or therapy programs are also less likely to have custom fitted equipment or equipment that's been bought specifically with their fit in mind. They tend to have items that they use across the board on all horses or on a variety of horses, so they're less likely to have a more tailored fit. We want our horses to have a lifted back, which separates the vertebrae, and then they'll have suppleness and flexibility to do what we ask. We want the back to lift, the hind legs to come under the body and drive the front end forward. We don't want to pull the headset in and forget about the hind end and back. This is why it's so important to focus on the hind end and back. Prior to getting the headset, I always teach my horses to soften and go into the bridle and just relax and stretch out while focusing on the hind end rather than pulling them into contact. As a general rule, it takes around 2 years to get the muscles for proper engagement and to teach the proper engagement. For a horse carrying a rider, it's kind of like doing the plank with weights on. It takes a lot of muscles and it's really hard on the body, so it can take a while to build that up properly. And with that in mind, you can often tell when a horse is being ridden properly by looking at their body. Excessive muscling on the underside of the neck generally means that they're carrying their head high and their back hollowed out. I'm going to post a photo of Archie, and you can see when I got him off the track, the underside of his neck is quite heavily muscled, and his neck has since changed. Okay, now on to another important aspect of proper carriage, that's saddle fit. I've already done a saddle fit video, so I'll link that in the description below for you to check out, so I'm just going to do this briefly. Improperly fitting saddles can cause pinching and other issues. Horses will not want to engage their back properly and lift it if it causes them pain to do so. So that's why it's important to make sure your saddle fits. Now with young horses, you want to build fitness in them to teach them how to carry a rider, which is why it's important to start getting them fit before you get onto them. Some work at young ages to help build muscle to prep the horse for ridden work is actually beneficial, despite so many people saying that it's not. But it's just a matter of how much work you do. If you do too much too soon, then that's when lameness happens. This is a quote from Roger Smith, who is an equine orthopedics professor at the Royal Veterinary College. Different tissues respond at different times. Tendons tend to be responsive early in life, joints and bones a little bit later. Certainly we know that bones are especially responsive when horses start training as yearlings and 2-year-olds, and obviously as a yearling and 2-year-old that doesn't necessarily mean you need to ride them at that age because their back is so immature, but you can do other things, and like obviously turnout on hilly terrain is very good for them. They shouldn't be just kept locked up in a stall. Now this is a quote from Hilary Clayton, who is a well-known equine scientist. You can look her up, she has a lot to say, she's really good. In the early stages, conditioning is fairly generic for all disciplines. Work on building aerobic fitness and strengthening the tissues. Build up the aerobic component of work in the early stages while allowing time for the musculoskeletal tissues to respond. Once your horse is ready to go under saddle, trainers should focus on slow, easy work that will allow the horse to get used to having a rider's weight on his back and to round his back under that weight by strengthening the thoracic and pectoral muscles. This is also from Clayton. So anyways, that's just a brief overview for young horses, and the next thing I'm going to talk about is hyperflexion, and this is the last thing that I'm going to really go over. Hyperflexion involves the riding or lunging a horse with his neck and poll tightly flexed and the profile of his face behind the vertical. This is from Practical Horseman magazine. This is not the same as just popping behind the vertical briefly like young horses tend to do when they're learning how to go on the bit and into contact and just figure it out. Rollkur and hyperflexion becomes a problem when it's held for consistent periods of time, so this is not something that's ideal. Studies have shown that hyperflexion results in the following: impaired breathing because it compresses the laryngeal opening, impaired vision, damage to structures of the neck, stress and anxiety. Negative effects far outweigh any presumed benefits. That's very, very important. And it's also important to note that Rollkur is not specific to bitted riding. It is absolutely possible to hyperflex your horse when they're riding bitless. It's just more commonly seen in bitted riding due to the prevalence of bits and how Rollkur became popularized in dressage sports and other sports where a bit would be required. So you're less likely to see it in bitless riding because bitless is less common than riding in bits, and it's also more commonly seen in show disciplines. This is a quote from a researcher at the University of Copenhagen. Putting too much emphasis on the bit and too little on a corresponding problem, for example the rein pulling, may not relieve the discomfort for the horse that much. Knowing how people, including riders, look for easy solutions, riding bitless may just become an excuse without improving the welfare of the horse. Hyperflexion is not correct and should not be desired when teaching your horse how to move in a correct frame. Out of 55 studies done on hyperflexion, 88% of them found negative effects on equine welfare. Only 1.8% of these studies, which was only one study, found any positive effects. So it's pretty clear that hyperflexion is not a good idea. There's overwhelmingly negative outcomes in the research that has been done on it. And these studies were a lot more comprehensive than the studies that we often see on bits. I have not been able to find anywhere near as much on bitted riding and why bits are bad, or bitless riding or anything like that. There is very, very limited studies on these, which is why it's so important to remember that you cannot make conclusive claims off of those studies. And I just think it's really important to read up on things and look for a variety of sources before coming to a final decision. And ultimately, just because someone does something differently than you doesn't make it wrong. We need to see more comprehensive full-scale studies done on a variety of different horses and a variety of different bits and bitless options before we come to a conclusion on which one's the best. So anyways, I just wanted to make a point on why we shouldn't make blanket claims about things like bits and why we shouldn't act like we're more ethical than someone else just because we do something differently. Bits aren't inherently bad. It depends on how you use them and which ones you're using. There's some bits that really probably don't belong in the mouths of animals, just like there's some bitless options that are probably too harsh to be in the hands of anyone. So I think it's important to keep that in mind and just look at your horse and focus on their preferences and whether or not they're happy, and work with professionals and get them to check out your horse regularly to make sure they're comfortable and pain-free. Ultimately, their opinions mean way more than anyone's on the internet, so I encourage you to talk to professionals and go based off of their opinions instead of the opinions of people who do not know you or your horse.